Good afternoon. My name is Nathan Stelter, president here at the Stelter Company, and thanks for joining us for this terrific webinar today, Weaving Plan Giving into Your Donor Conversations, presented by the one and only Melanie Norton, who's a founder and a philanthropic consultant for Norton Philanthropic Counsel. I'll get back to introducing Melanie in just a quick minute, but first I'd like to say a few words around the webinar series. Many of you are familiar that Stelter, as an industry leader in plan giving marketing, is committed to providing not only innovative solutions, but education for our industry. We're always happy to host these complimentary webinars as part of our annual series, of which today is our 8th of the 2021 series. We've had some terrific speakers earlier in the year, Russell James, Catherine Myrie, and others. And still on the schedule for this year are presenters like Jen Shang from the Institute for Sustainable Philanthropy, who teaches us how to love our donors. Adrian Sargent will also join us later in the year, sharing insights from 25 years of research into repeat donors. And then up next in just 2 short weeks is our longtime friend, Margaret Holman. September 22nd, Margaret's the president of Holman Consulting. She'll be providing tips on how to use plan gifts to solve donor problems. So as always, you can register for any of those webinars on our website at stelter.com/webinars. You can also access the archive of webinars there as well. But do also keep an eye on your inboxes. We'll be sending invites out as those dates get closer. So now back to our webinar and presenter today, Melanie Norton. Melanie is passionate about philanthropy and success of individuals and organizations that enhance the world in which we live. As an accomplished professional and leader, Melanie fueled her drive to make a meaningful impact for nonprofits and individuals through the nation by founding Norton Philanthropic Counsel back in 2017. Prior to that launch, Melanie was the Vice President of Development and Alumni Engagement at DePauw University, where she led the university to more than 320 million of a successful 383 million comprehensive campaign. In that role, Melanie oversaw the strategy and fundraising efforts for the university and restructured and managed a staff of 40 full-time development and alumni professionals. Melanie was also previously a fundraising consultant with JGA, where she consulted on all phases of philanthropic work, including feasibility studies, capital campaigns, quantitative and qualitative analysis, and major gift and development plan creation. Melanie's a certified fundraising executive, also holding an MBA from Kelley School of Business at Indiana, and a BA in business from Franklin College. I'm super excited. I wanted to have Melanie as one of our speakers for some time now, so very excited to introduce Melanie and hand it over to her. It's all yours.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Nathan. Thanks, Jen, for all of your help. Thanks all of you for coming out and participating today, at least virtually. So this is a different experience for some, but we're making do as best we can. Certainly appreciate the privilege of your time, and Nathan, appreciate that introduction. Just really fortunate to have had a chance to start MPC about 4 years ago now. It's hard to believe it's been 4 years. It goes very quickly. Boutique practice, strategic planning and strategic fundraising and campaign work is probably the majority of what I do and some of my team members help do. But our vision is to blend the art and science of philanthropy to support client success. And so we're going to talk a lot today about the art of philanthropy. You can see just a tiny bit about me there. So the little girl in red wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up, and her dad talked her out of it for some reason. So she became a fundraising professional instead. So that was me back then with my best buddy, and the lower one is me today with my current best buddy, who hopefully will be quiet during the remainder of this presentation. So again, thanks for your time. It's precious, and I appreciate it very much. So I'm going to take over the controls here. So what is our goal today? I mean, I always hope that those who tune in or have a chance to, I have a chance to see in person, leave with some information they didn't know in advance, and they leave inspired when they leave any of the presentations. Today, we're going to talk about weaving plan giving in like a pro. And the bottom line is you don't have to be a pro to engage with prospects and donors about plan giving. So our goal today is to make sure that we learn some tools and tips that may help us do that in terms of conversation, even if we don't know all of the technical answers. So I find it's really important, and I really take personal joy and sort of translating something that seems complicated or difficult into terms that everyone can understand. So that's our goal for today. Thanks again for being here. We're going to translate one craft to another. So they always say, you know, talk about something you know. And frankly, I know very little about weaving, but this presentation gave me a chance to learn some more about it. And, you know, one particular article that I read shared with me that there are 6 elements for success in terms of weaving. And so we're going to translate those 6 elements of success for weaving into 6 elements of success for weaving and plan giving to our conversations. So the first element in weaving is loom. For us, that's building a strong foundation. Incredibly important in terms of the work that we do. You know, there are a lot of people online today. Again, grateful for your time. Variety of different roles. So I can't stress enough how important building from a strong foundation is. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a bit. Also, step 2 in weaving, cotton warp. For us, that is setting the framework for success. There is a science and a framework for the work that we do, and we want to make sure before we engage in these conversations that we have that framework and in a manner such that it will allow us to be successful. Number 3, the weaving needle will allow us in terms of our work to get sharp about our focus. And I think that's one thing I'll talk more about obviously later, but I think it's incredibly important. It's hard sometimes, particularly now when there are a lot of things grabbing at our attention, but getting sharp about our focus in the conversations and in our work is really important. The yarn, clearly necessary in a successful weaving endeavor, and certainly the art of our work. The art of our work is where sort of all those beautiful intricacies come into play and really help us, craft solutions that work both for our donors and for our organizations. The 5th step in terms of weaving is instruction, knowing what to do and how to do it. And I think one of the things for me, hopefully that you'll take away are taking those cues so that we can present the options that are going to be most beneficial, again, for both the donor and for the organization. And then finally, the batten, which in weaving helps strengthen and pull everything together. And certainly for us, in terms of our work, helps us secure a strong outcome too. So we're going to use those 6 elements to sort of framework our conversation today, and look forward to hearing more questions at the end of the presentation. So again, you'll remember number 1 is the loom, building from a strong foundation. And one of the questions I frequently think about in terms of my work with clients and others is, are you starting with the basic underpinnings for success? It's really important, and I think unfortunately often for many fundraisers and many shops, it's missing. Some of that tie from, the strong foundation to what we're doing on a daily basis isn't always obvious or clear. So having a clear understanding of your organization's mission, the vision for the organization, where are we going in the short term, super important. And then the strategies for forward movement. I've actually been part of many different strategic planning endeavors, and I'm always amazed at how often, the development, advancement, fundraising counterparts are not necessarily a key part of the conversation, and I believe strongly they should be. These are the people, the individuals, and the groups who are going to know what our real capacity is to, raise money. And if you're not engaged in those conversations or in those strategies, I think we already started a bit of a deficit. And I put on here too, every advancement plan should be the extension of an organization's strategic plan. I can't see everyone online, but if we were in person, I would ask you to raise your hand if your annual fundraising goal is C minus A equals B. And again, in the course of my career and in many different exposure to many different organizations, often that's the case. An organization will, start with a laundry list of all the things they need, and they'll subtract, what they have, and then they'll say, here's your fundraising goal for the year. And that's not always the most strategic way to do it. I would argue it's not strategic at all for most organizations. And so, if your plan as a unit, as in the advancement development office is strong, it's gonna have a very clear line back to the overarching strategic plan for the organization. It's also really important to understand what you're raising money for and why. And your donors, your prospects, they deserve an answer to that question. I think it's very easy for organizations to come up with a laundry list of all the things they want or need. It's really hard to execute, particularly the farther you are as a fundraising professional from the outcomes of that work. If you're not the person who's responsible for executing, that can get really tricky sometimes. So I think it's important to ask those questions and really understand why. And then I also believe strongly in the fact that you need the tools and resources to be successful. I'm so passionate about this work and the people who do this work. And it's hard work. It's not easy under the best of circumstances. We don't have a magic wand, although sometimes I think we make it seem like we do, and we're able to do pretty amazing things. But it's important for organizations to make sure that the team responsible for making the vision come to life has the tools and resources needed to be successful. So you probably read in the lead up to this presentation, this is not a presentation about the specific tools. I know there are lots of opportunities to learn that information. I've listed, several opportunities around this wheel of opportunity, if you will. But these are all part of the strong foundation. And if you are someone who engages in conversations with prospects and donors about giving and plan giving, I think it's important for you to know several things. Number one, we want to know what the donor wants to accomplish. And that involves more listening than talking, right? So, it's probably somewhat rare, I think, at least in the course of my experience, to enter into really deep plan giving conversations the first time you meet someone. So, a lot of these conversations maybe are years in the making sometimes, but it's important for us to know before we think about how to weave plan giving in, what the donor really wants to accomplish, what are their goals and their personal goals. We also want to know or have a good idea of what the best assets are for them to use, or what they think their best assets are to use in terms of making a gift. So, those are italicized because those are very donor focused questions or elements to know. Internally, as professionals, we need to know how the gift is made. And sometimes that's not easy. If it's a complicated gift, if it involves assets, every organization wants cash. Hopefully we've heard Russell James as an earlier speaker, talk about that. Those are gifts from the little bucket, right? We want gifts from the big bucket. But we need to at least have an idea internally about how the gift is made. Super important in making sure that the organization and the donor have a great experience. We need to know what tax benefits may be associated potentially with the gift. Donors certainly may want to know those things if applicable. But, something, again, that in terms of a solid foundation, some basic things we want to know. Also, potential for capital gains benefits, those type of things, potential for income, depending on the tool that they utilize. Perhaps there are other donor benefits, retained life estate, maybe they can stay there for a while. So all sorts of things that we want to make sure we know and understand. But certainly really important for us to understand how the gift will benefit our organization too. And finally, what the internal approval process is, what the procedures are for accepting the gift. So again, not going to spend a lot of time on these today in this presentation. We're going to talk more about the art of the conversation. But those are what I consider to be some foundational things that will really help you in terms of the conversation, and also in terms of your comfort level with these type of conversations. Again, don't need to be the expert. We've got hundreds of people across the nation who are experts who can help us if we don't, but knowing some of the basics. And can't stress enough that last one too. You know, I've heard some horror stories about, you know, gifts that have gone awry and donors that have been very upset because somebody somewhere along the line decides I don't want the gift anymore. So, you know, we need to know those things in terms of having a strong foundation. So having the foundation in place, we're going to talk a little bit now about what I'm calling the framework for success, or the cotton warp. And I have an entire other presentation on basically this concept right here. And that is, you know, where do we look for the maximum opportunity for return on our investment? And, you know, I just believe so strongly that smart programs and fundraisers are really looking in the right places. And these three broad categories for me are certainly what I consider to be the right places. You know, there are just scads of research, right, that can help us in terms of this, but it's hard. You know, just because we believe something to be true doesn't mean it's easy to convince others. That may be the case. I was very fortunate when I did work to DePauw twice. When I went back the second time as VP, they did give me an opportunity to restructure the division. And that restructure tuned us in very sharply to looking at individuals. And, you know, we already know from the Giving USA information that nearly 9 out of 10 gifts are given by or influenced by individuals through bequests and family foundations and just outright giving. You know, and you may have boards that say, well, why aren't we spending more time on corporate giving? Why aren't we, you know, searching for more grants, all different sorts of things? Well, the answer is, you know, for me, it was, well, I want to go where the gifts are coming from. And they're coming from individuals. So, I mean, that doesn't mean that there isn't the occasional amazing foundation gift or other things that are super important to our operation. But it does, the data sort of speaks for itself. And this is great to arm yourself with when you are talking to board members and others. You know, it's also important to understand that the top, you know, 10% of this nation holds almost 70% of the nation's wealth. So again, it's a data point, it's real. Federal Reserve sends out a statistic. I've got a chart on this a little later in the presentation here. But, you know, in addition to that, that top 10% also holds almost 90% of equity in corporations and mutual fund shares. So that's astounding when you stop and think about that. So again, you know, thinking about individuals in terms of, you know, your program and the framework for success, super important. Non-cash assets, Russell James, gee, what a gem. You know, I mean, his research is just phenomenal. I assume this is probably part of what you maybe talked about, but again, organizations that are asking for gifts, non-cash gifts, and particularly gifts of appreciated securities, their fundraising growth is multiple times what other programs are experiencing. So, and that's based on more than 1 million nonprofit tax returns. So that is fast, hard data that I think, again, can be particularly compelling to those outside your organization or related to your organization, like board members, but not in the day-to-day work, you know, in terms of how you're organizing the work that you do every day. And then finally, the reason we're all here, hopefully we're all believers, but plan giving, just the golden opportunity for plan giving right now. I feel so fortunate very early in my career to have met Phil Purcell, who sort of lit that fire for me around plan giving. And so I had early exposure to the importance of plan giving. And I just couldn't, I couldn't share that any more enthusiastically with you. You know, Chronicle Philanthropy study back in 2017 estimated 97 trillion to pass in a 50-year time period. And my common quote is, who cares if we're a few $1 trillion off? I mean, the end result is, the takeaway is, there is an astounding amount of wealth that is going to pass at some point. And, 75 trillion of that we knew about in 2017, and baby boomers had 57% of it then. So, my takeaway from this, again, in terms of the framework for your success, knowing about your organization first and what your goals and vision are, is, where are we looking? When we start to think outside the organization, where are we looking? What are we looking at? The synergies created here are super powerful. And I think leveraging this knowledge in your planning and in your programs is going to be super helpful. Also, in terms of the framework for success, I love to think about great conversations this way. So I put this slide together for us, and, it talks about, what is a great conversation? Well, we sort of know it when we're in it, but have we ever stopped to really take the time to dissect it and think about what that might be like? And we've got questions, right? That's what we're doing in this work. They've got answers. So I think for us, it's really all in the way that we frame it. Great conversations, are going to arise, or conversations about planned giving, from having great conversations. So we need to have a conversation with our prospects in order to get us where we'd like to go. Great conversations really encourage open-ended questions when possible. It's not 100% of the time. When I worked at DePauw, we had a structured interview process that we conducted for really decades there, and lots of open-ended questions in the course of that. So I'm so grateful to the institution for that opportunity to really help me hone my interview skills and think about open-ended questions. But, a conversation, a back and forth, is going to be a lot more than yes and no. And then when you think about open-ended questions, what do? Well, they encourage full, meaningful answers using the donor's knowledge and or feelings, right? So we're asking them for something more than a yes or a no, and that gives them an opportunity to share more with us. That knowledge, what they're thinking about, their feelings, give us clues about their needs and desires. So what is their motivation for making a gift? What is it, again, that they want to accomplish? And then finally, our knowledge about those needs and desires really gives us the puzzle pieces necessary to help weave in a planned giving solution. So fairly simple, but I think an important thing to keep in mind in terms of work is, how can I encourage a dialogue and a conversation? Part of that framework for success, certainly to me, is to be curious. And what does that mean? I always used to tell, those I would work with, presidents, board members, anyone going into a conversation with the donor, our goal is to learn something that we didn't know before we walked in the door. Hopefully we know a lot. They don't need to necessarily know that we know as much as we do about them, but be curious. Find out something that we didn't know in advance. All those little nuggets of information will really help us in terms of crafting those planned giving solutions later. Start with a focus on your prospects first. And I can think about a number of, team members I've worked with and others and clients where they get into a conversation or they get to a meeting and they just start sort of selling the organization or talking about the organization. And my goal is, let's flip that if we can. Start with a focus on your prospects first. I worked in banking decades ago, and I remember a speaker pretty early on in my tenure there talking, giving an example of what it felt like to go to a party and talk to someone who starts talking about themselves first versus asking you questions and talking to you. And if you stop and think about it that way, it makes a lot of sense. So start with a focus on your prospects first, and then encourage them to elaborate on the questions that you ask. And so, so on the left-hand side, there are some great sort of open-ended conversation starters or words. Why did you? How did you? What makes you? Describe for me, share a little bit more about, tell me about, I'd love to know more about, X, Y, or Z. Those are great ways to start open-ended questions. Again, very practical. But I think, something to keep in mind as you're thinking about those conversations. And then I think, on the second-hand side, some of these clearly are not open-ended questions. But I do find that they're helpful conversation starters sometimes if you don't know where to start. And sometimes, it might be easy, and we'll cover some of these questions later, to just start with kind of the obvious, maybe the weakest point. Gee, Mr. Smith, I know, this organization has been calling on you for years, or I've been calling on you for years, but I don't think I've ever asked you about X, Y, or Z. Do you mind if we talk about that a little bit today? So, I remember very clearly early in my career feeling really guilty for the lack of knowledge I would have about a donor sometimes going in, and our records just aren't perfect. No matter how hard we try, I think they're getting better. But, it's important to not let that stop you from having that conversation. So those are a few, I think, conversation starters that can be helpful. So now we're going to get a little sharp about our focus, and it's our weaving needle section, if you will. And this is probably my general, if you will, contribution to the effort here in terms of thinking about conversations in 3 broad categories. And if you can keep this in mind when you're meeting with someone, you can have, honestly, a nearly endless supply of conversation topics from which to choose. So, I've had lots of tips through the years about, how to engage in a conversation or questions to ask, but I like to think about it in these 3 broad categories. What are questions about them? What are things we can talk about that focus on us? And what are some other things outside of those topics that might help us engage in conversation and ultimately, in this case, weave in plan giving? So, in the category of things about them, life changes are golden opportunities for us as fundraisers and those in gift planning to think about ways to weave in gift planning. Just an absolute gold mine of information in terms of life changes. Also, people they know or people maybe they don't know, but allow us again to weave in that conversation. So, certainly things like family, those are obvious, but I'll share a couple of examples and a little bit about others that they may know, other ways to weave that into a conversation too. So, again, starting with them, questions about some of these broad categories, I think we could come up with a pretty strong list. Again, if we were in person and I had a whiteboard, we'd have a chance to do that someday. The second category, things about us, right? Our organization, maybe us personally, but generally speaking about our organization. So, what are our priorities as an organization? What are the things that are important to us? What's that vision? Where are we headed? Again, sometimes I think, this might feel a little bit more like, we're selling something. And generally speaking, I don't necessarily like that term or to think about it that way. But, at some point when you're entering into a gift conversation with someone, you're going to need to start to weave these things in as well. So what are the priorities? Do we have a clear understanding on behalf of our organization about what those things are and why? Again, that circles back to some of the things I mentioned earlier. And then also, special initiatives. Campaigns are great for this opportunity, right? Because, there are always a lot of opportunities in terms of campaigns to have some special initiatives or things that we're thinking about. But, what is happening perhaps for us that's out of the ordinary? I think those, again, if you just stop and think about those 4 categories, you could spend a lot of time talking to someone and engaging them in conversation. And then the third category, the things that are sort of outside of those, what's happening in terms of current events. I mean, the pandemic, clearly lots and lots to consider there. The markets, what's happening. I mean, generally speaking, I probably steer away from the obvious ones. And sometimes these can be heated too. I have to be careful and know your donor prospect, of course, but lots happening in terms of current events to talk about. And then there are always new tools or existing tools and tax law changes and those sort of things that also give us great fodder for conversation. So I'm thinking about it this way, 3 broad categories as you get in there. If you start to get stuck as you're talking to someone, just think about these 3 broad categories as you start to move forward. And then thinking about that, focus again, just to spend a little bit more time on open-ended questions. You know, they're great as a follow-up from closed-end questions to engage our prospects and donor in conversation and to encourage exchange. So, you know, an example might be, you know, what a fabulous picture of your family. You know, can you tell me a little bit more about them? Or how did you first become involved with our organization? I don't know if I've ever asked that. You can also use open-ended questions to find out more about them, their wants, their needs, their challenges. You know, an example of a question like that might be, you know, tell me a story about your most exciting or gratifying giving experience. You know, what made that so special for you? Or what is your greatest hope as a philanthropist? What do you hope, you know, to accomplish with your generous philanthropy? Those are great questions that can also share some insight into those wants and needs and challenges. Certainly, open-ended questions give us the opportunity to educate our donors or prospects about the problems or challenges for which we might have a solution. Super exciting in the world of plan giving. So, you know, something like that might be, would you tell me a little bit more about the tax challenges you mentioned, you know, having earlier this year? Or again, my famous, I should probably know the answer to this, but you know, has anyone ever asked you if you might consider making a planned gift or leaving a bequest for our organization? Great opportunities to help our donors perhaps solve some of their challenges. And then also clearly open-ended questions help build trust by demonstrating authentic care and concern. And, you know, I also sort of cherish this world of fundraisers and those who work in philanthropy, because I feel like far more often than not, that authenticity exists in the people who are in these circles. And I love that. That provided for me personally something that a world in banking, no offense against banking, it was a great education, but that I didn't see as much as I see in the world that I work in now. And I love that. So, you know, those might be bigger questions. Like, you know, if you don't mind me asking, what do you dream for the most when you think about the legacy you'd like to leave with our organization? Or what do you fear the most when you think about the future? Those are just some examples of open-ended questions that potentially could help us. So now we get into the really pretty part. That's the yarn, or the art of our work. So again, fundraising is about the art and the science. I believe strongly in both. And the good news today is you already have what you need to be successful in weaving and plan giving. You already have it, even if you don't know the first thing about a CRT. What do you have? Well, you have the plan and the purpose, right, for your organization. You know why you're there, what your mission is. Hopefully you know what the plan is, and you have knowledge about the organization and its needs and the marriage that you're hoping to create with your donors and their philanthropy. You have the cotton warp that, you know, hopefully is the research, not only about your organization, but about the prospects and your approach to the prospects, which we're sharing today, to help us get on track. And those also then lead to the topics and the questions that we have for them. So that's the weaving needle and the getting sharp. So we're going to have all these things when we finish today, if we don't have them already. This is the fun part. So, you know, taking cues for options about them. I mentioned significant life changes as golden opportunities for weaving and plan giving. And I believe everyone will have the opportunity for a copy of this presentation if you want. So you don't necessarily have to write down all these questions and answers. But, you know, births, deaths, marriages, you know, tell me a little bit more about your mom and her legacy. Those are questions that really get donors or prospects talking and give you real insight into who they are as a person. Job changes, promotions, retirements, you know, how do you think this promotion will impact your original retirement timeline? You know, tread carefully there, right? I'll talk about it in a second, but the pandemic's had a real impact and it's not been positive for everyone. I mean, there's some real hurt involved there. So, but again, these assume that you know at least some about your prospects and donors. Upcoming sales of businesses or business interests. Have you ever considered the potential of thinking about us before you decide to sell your business? Kids or grandkids attending college or graduating from college, what are your long-term financial plans now that Susie's going to be graduating from college this year? Windfalls of cash, great opportunities to ask about, changes in plans for the future, sales of real estate and other significant assets, establishing family foundations, donor advised funds. I'd love to know more about your family's legacy. Why did you all decide to start a family foundation? And then again, tax law changes or even gifts that they've made, I think are great opportunities. So, it's amazing to hear about that major gift that you left to your church. Tell me, why you decided to do that. Those are all really great opportunities. And I think tax law changes and gifts made is sort of an extra category. It's not really a life change, but I wanted to throw that in there because I think, again, they're good opportunities. So.
Hey, Melanie.
Yes.
This is Jen. Sorry to break in. Your voice is cutting in and out just a little bit. And so I was wondering if you can move your microphone. Yeah, up to you. Yep, I think that'll do it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay. Okay, I think I've lost control in the PowerPoint. Okay, so questions about them. Try again here, Jen. The who do you know, I think is really important. Who do you know or do you know? So, questions like that might be, who do you know from your years of volunteering that might also be interested in considering our organization in their estate plans? Or, something like, I've been meaning to ask you if you know Sarah Jones. I think she graduated around the time you did. She's a longtime donor just like you. She recently established a charitable gift annuity. Have we ever talked to you about the amazing benefits of a CGA before? So again, questions about them. Questions about us again, and I'm going to do a time check here. I want to make sure we have a chance to get through this. But again, knowing those priorities, the vision, having a strategic plan, understanding any special initiatives we might have, getting sharp about our case for support and creating those synergies are really the cues about us that we need. So those might look like questions, something like this. We've talked about how important a strong endowment is for the long-term survival of the university. Many donors, this is where you're trying to put them in the category of lots of people do this type of thing. They think about us in their estate plan through a bequest. Can we talk to you about your interest in that? Or your enthusiasm is so inspiring as we enter the final stages of this campaign. We're thinking about a plan gift challenge. Would you be willing to discuss how we might leverage a plan gift or your plan gift to help us inspire others to make a gift? So again, it's an unprecedented, really sobering time. The word opportunity really feels almost inappropriate. Always be human, lead with care and with heart, and don't assume anything. I think particularly now, really important. Silence is not golden, I think, in terms of assuming things about our donors and prospects. Make sure that you stay mission focused and donor centered. Our organizations really need us. They desperately need the work that we do, and our donors need it too, right? It's a great opportunity for them to make a legacy and long-time impact. When we let the donor lead, I think in terms of those conversations, we can really benefit. So, the about other, clearly I mentioned earlier, the pandemic can be a little bit of a slippery slope. I think we want to make sure that we tread carefully there. It's impacted everyone, but not equally. But hey, the wealthy are still wealthy, and in many cases getting wealthier. There's lots of information out there, and there has been for the better part of a year now about this, but plan giving is definitely having a moment right now. And the silver lining is, perhaps people have been thinking about, their ultimate plans a lot more, and many of them are ready. I pulled this from September the 3rd, and you can see the last time I did this presentation, I think was in February. The market is still doing well. It's doing better than it was back in February. So that is, I should say, I didn't check yesterday. So I probably should have, but generally speaking, I think it's still pretty strong. So, and this, this data point that the Fed offers, I think is just really sort of astounding when you think about wealth by wealth percentile group, and that top 10%. Having at last quarter's report 70% of the wealth. So, again, everyone can make a difference for our organization. Not everyone can make an equal difference in terms of dollars for our organization, but everyone can make an equal difference in terms of participation. So there's an angle, if you will, for everyone participating in the life of our organizations, but an awful lot of wealth in that top 10%. Other, things that might fall into the other category. Again, I think you can see some data points here. I'm going to do another time check. I want to make sure that I leave us plenty of opportunity to cover some of the questions, but, lots of data that will point to the moment that plan giving is having free will. Reported some pretty astounding results. And some of the increases that they've seen, and there are ways. The worst thing, I think, in terms of conversations with our donors is to pull back and not have a conversation. I mean, a lot of organizations were really afraid, particularly at the beginning of the pandemic, to sort of reach out and didn't want to seem insensitive. And I think everyone's come to realize it's important to continue to do that. A lot of my organizations that I have a chance to work with had a fantastic last year. So so you'll get a chance to see that, and we can talk about that. But I wanted to at least share a few opportunities here for ways that you might weave in some of these questions. So again, current events. How are you and your family doing? How has the pandemic had an impact on you? Or I read a report recently that indicated there was a surge in plan gift commitments due to the pandemic. Many people are rethinking their estate plans. Is that something that's crossed your mind in the past year? Have we ever shared those benefits with you? How have the events of the last year caused you to reflect on your life or your legacy or how you spend your time? All really great questions to ask. Or you might say something like, I saw an interesting and sad report yesterday that said, life expectancy has dropped a full year due to the pandemic. Isn't, that surreal? What do you think about that? These are all great ways, again, to sort of dip your toe, open that door into a plan giving conversation. Stock market, Joy, it's amazing how strong it's been despite ups and downs. How's your portfolio doing? What stocks do you watch most closely? Have you ever considered making gifts of stock to your charities of choice? Or, did you see the report the Fed released? The top 10% holds 69%, I think now 70% of the nation's wealth. What do you think about that? And then something a little more targeted, I guess, at the end, but again, sort of trying to get your donors and prospects into lots of people support us this way or do this. Some of our alumni have done really well. In fact, I've had a few donors decide to go ahead and pay forward a portion of their future bequests now. They were really motivated by the size of the gift they could make and also the potential to see their gift in action. Have you ever considered something like that? So again, hopefully good nuggets and some conversation starters that will help us. Of course, tools, tax law changes, lots of opportunities there. Again, not necessarily the focus of this particular presentation, but sort of always something churning there. And something like that might be, hey, the required minimum distribution is back this year. Have you thought about how you might want to leverage your gift? Or, retirement planning continues to be more and more important. Do you work closely with a financial advisor? How regularly do you check in with your advisor? Have you made any significant changes to your retirement plans due to the changes in the past year? Have you ever considered establishing a donor advised fund? Or, if they have one, did you make any changes to the nonprofits for which you advised gifts last year? What motivates your giving the most? Again, really good opportunities to open those conversations. And, you know, when you stop and think about it in terms of a strong outcome, there are definitely some common threads. We certainly want to prepare in advance. We want to use the research that's available to us to help. Have an intention for the meeting. Even if you don't necessarily get there, I think having that intention up front, important. Be authentic. Again, be interested and interesting. You want people to meet with you now and again. So I think thinking about that is important. And again, thinking in those broad categories really hopefully will help you if you start to get stuck with, you know, what are some things I could talk about to get this person talking. You know, one of the things I have then plus other equals us. What do I mean by that? You know, I like to focus probably on the other things before I focus on us, the organization. Because again, our goal is to learn something about them and then follow up, you know, next to making the ask the most important thing. So, you know, my words of encouragement, I'll do a time check here, is for us to keep calm and fundraise on. You know, fundraising success really does rely on a tight-knit plan. It's not happenstance. It's not something everyone can do. It's not something everyone is great at. I mean, there are all sorts of misconceptions, I think, about what fundraising is. You know, if somebody's wealthy, they'll just give us money because they have a lot of money. I think probably everyone on this presentation knows those falsehoods are really frustrating sometimes, but forward movement is a must, right? In support of our organizations and the mission and those we serve, you know, moving forward is something we have to do. Just remain confident that you have already what is needed. If you don't know something that might be really specific or you know, every detail about a complex gift, it's okay. Your goal is to get another meeting, and it's great to say, you know, I don't know that, but I'll find out for you. Or, gee, you know, I have an idea, but I'd love to bring back, you know, Bill Smith in my office to have a conversation too. Lots of opportunities for that. Just lead with care. And lead with the goal of having a conversation, and you're going to be golden. So these are some of the resources that I use to create the presentation, and I think I'm close to time. So Jen, Nathan, I'll allow you to share some questions if we have some.
We sure do, Melanie. Thank you so much. One question that I think is a great one here. It was sent in anonymously, so I can't tell you who, but I think it's a really good question, is how do you redirect a conversation if it starts going in the direction of a controversial topic, say maybe politics? How do you get back on track?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And, you know, I don't know that I have any magic in terms of that. I will tell you what my personal philosophy was and that of the team. And that was, I hope that 99.9% of the people that I met with had no idea what my political leanings were. I never felt like it, certainly in the course of the organizations that I worked for, that that part of it being about me was appropriate really at all. But it is hard. I mean, it's and I know it's harder now than it probably ever has been. You know, and a lot of nonprofits that I work with are entering conversations where, you know, they feel like they're being painted with a broad brush by some prospects and donors because of the type of organization they are. You know, the best thing, I think, number one, I try and listen. If it, you know, and my skill for redirect is, you know, gee, yeah, I can tell you're really passionate about that, and I know we could talk about that for a long time. I share some of your views if I do. But, you know, yeah, I'd be remiss if I didn't make sure before I left today to let you know a little bit about, you know, this latest priority that we have, or, you know, ask how that, whatever that, whatever that view is that they have, how maybe that might change their views in terms of what they plan on funding in the future. I mean, there are probably some gentle ways to do that, but it's tough. I mean, as I mentioned, even on a great day, these are tough jobs. And I think just acknowledging that you've heard them, you know, maybe restating a little bit of, you know, their position, or putting it in a nutshell and then trying to tie a bow and move on to something else is probably the best advice I can give.
Great advice. And again, I just want to say, before getting to a couple of these other questions, such awesome practical advice today. I know seeing some of the questions here, there's a lot of concern around how do you navigate some of these sensitive topics. And, one of them here, Steve was talking about, would you really talk about someone else's gift to your organization who your donor might know? Isn't that private information? So I have a thought on that, but I'm curious, kind of how you navigate that.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, certainly I would never share something that wasn't public. So that's a good point. And I probably should have pointed that out in terms of that. But yeah, you definitely want to make sure, that you have permission to do that, that these, I work with some clients and we sort of work on a series of donor profiles and stories that we have at the ready to utilize whenever. So you want to make sure that you either have the donor's permission or it is a story or an example that that you've already made public before you do that. That's a great point. Thank you for pointing that out. I
was going to mention the same thing because I do think it is really important because of that social proof aspect of people seeing that others like them have done things like this, and that's just such a powerful thing. But obviously, yes, need to make sure it's public knowledge and the donor has the approval.
Yes,
Jen?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we have another question that's asking how long you should wait to reach out again after you have your first conversation. So you have that, they're not quite ready to make a commitment, and they don't feel like they're ready. Then what's the best way to approach them and kind of a time frame for that?
Yeah, that one I wish I could say there's sort of an answer to that. I think the answer really is it depends. I try and get an idea of the time frame, or I tried when I was doing fundraising specifically to get an idea before I concluded the conversation. So I hear what you're saying. I understand. Do you mind if I reach out to you again in 6 months just to see where you are in terms of your decision process? And and if I have a special reason to reach out before then, is it okay if I do that? I try and establish those parameters before the conversation ends, so you have somewhat of a clear idea of what a follow-up plan might be, even if the answer is no. When we travel a lot, that might be, gee, I'll be back in Phoenix next year. I hope it's okay, even if you haven't made a decision, if I call on you again and share what's happening at that time. Those sort of, I think, prompts can help give you a better idea of the amount of time. But I always try to follow it up with any visit, regardless of the answer or the outcome, with something within a week that's just a thank you for meeting, and sort of recapping the summary of what you think you heard. Ideally, you would do that also in the conversation, but some sort of a follow-up that genuinely thanks them for their time for meeting.
Here's another one. I don't think there's a one silver bullet answer per se to it, but it's again around kind of uncomfortable topics, but broaching the topic with people who are clearly uncomfortable thinking or talking about their end of their lives. Mm-hmm. Obviously that's part of the world we live. Yeah. But curious kind of what your experience and thoughts around that.
Yeah, I mean, we all have them, right? And there are just some people who aren't going to go there. And that's okay. I think, my recommendation there is to affirm for them that it's okay if they don't want to go there. I think you gain far more mileage by acknowledging that, hey, it's their decision, and if and when they would ever like to have a conversation about anything, related to, really gifts that go beyond writing a check or cash. I like to lump a lot of things, frankly, into plan giving, or gift planning, if you will. But I think just acknowledging that it's okay. I mean, there is, you're still, the organization is still grateful for whatever way they can be involved and contribute to the organization. Sometimes just giving people permission to not want to share that is okay. And sometimes, I mean, I can think of donors in the past that took years. I mean, it really did. It was like a drip, but eventually we got there. So don't give up, I would say, but also, you can't force your way into that conversation if someone doesn't, if they really don't want to have it. So.
No, I think those are great points. And I just real quick, Jen, I know you got another one or two here before we the annual giving you mentioned, if it's an annual giving donor, I love that approach too of if they've been giving for a period of time as well, of having that gift to live on in perpetuity.
Mm-hmm.
That's, sometimes a less evasive way to kind of position as well, because they're already comfortable with that annual gift. So again, great advice.
Great tip. Yeah.
I was just going to add, kind of talking about, you were saying that some donors you have, it's been years and years and years that you've been stewarding this relationship with them before you get the gift. And we had another person ask, how do you keep a donor from becoming a friend, which I find really interesting. She notes that she's been in it for 25 years and has really become friends with a lot of these donors. And do you have thoughts on that?
I do. I may not have a popular thought on that. I think it's okay to be friends with your donors. I mean, I feel like as part of authentic relationship and conversation, but what's not okay, there's a line, right? And I think what's not okay is when the person becomes more vested in you, in their relationship with you than the organization. I think you do have to sometimes work really hard to keep the organization out front. But I have lots of former donors, frankly, who are friends. Some of them I know will be lifelong friends. There are lines, we all know where they are in terms of our gut, and I don't ever cross over those lines, but hopefully people genuinely do enjoy seeing you. And I think, again, my advice there is to make sure that you're always above board, in terms of your interaction with all prospects and donors, and you keep the organization out front. Sometimes you have to keep bringing the conversation back to the organization. I found that a lot with some of those donors, because it's important to be authentic when you're setting up the appointment, if you're intentional about why you're there. I mean, why you're meeting with them, and what keeping in mind your intention for the meeting. So
Sure.
Hopefully it's not to have an afternoon off to, hang out, although those are fun, but that's probably not what your organization is paying you to do.
Right, right. Well, we are getting close to being out of time. I wanted to mention a few fun comments. We had someone say, stand up and cheer. She's a fellow Franklin College alumni, Rebecca.
Oh, wow.
So thanks, Rebecca, for joining us. And then we had another person say, when you were talking about wanting to be a vet and your dad talking you out of it, this person said you could do both. This person is a development director at a Humane Society. So putting them both together.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. And we've had just a lot of people in the questions just thank you for your time and your advice today. So we also thank you. And if we didn't get to your question, Melanie has offered her email address. You can see that on the screen right now, melanie@nortoncounsel.com. Feel free to reach out to her. If you have questions about Stelter services, you can talk to Nathan or myself. Our email addresses are on the screen, or you can check us out at stelter.com. And then finally, we did record it. So as long as it worked, we will have the recording and the handouts available to you on our website at stelter.com/webinars. I will be sending out an email on Friday to let you know when they are there. So you can wait for that and then check that out and share that with your friends. And then finally, we do have another webinar already, like Nathan mentioned, coming up in 2 weeks. So head to our webinars page on our website and get signed up for that. Melanie, thank you so much for spending the last hour with us and your expertise and all of that. And also, Nathan, it's always nice to have you join us as well. So thank you so much. And thanks everyone for being here with us. We had around 600 people on the line with us today. That's amazing. Thanks for spending the last hour with us. We hope that you found it useful for your time, and we hope to see you again in 2 weeks. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.